Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Sharon, would you please advance to the next slide? Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Betsy McShane, and I'm the state biologist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service here in New Jersey. And I would like to welcome you to our fifth presentation in our Working Lands for Wildlife Webinar Wednesday series. This evening's presentation is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our YouTube channel. A link to the recording will be provided in the chat. This webinar series is a joint effort between NRCS and several partner organizations that work together to restore wildlife habitat on private lands here in New Jersey. Throughout the series, we will chat with different partner biologists to discuss their work and the particular species that they focus on. Each session will be held on Microsoft Teams beginning at 7 p.m. Presentations will last about 30 to 45 minutes with a question and answer session to follow. While we welcome you to join in the conversation during the Q&A, we would appreciate it if you would mute your microphone in the meantime to reduce background noise. Thank you very much. And just a little bit about our webinar series. In the first session, I gave an introduction to the New Jersey Natural Resources Conservation Service and some of the programs that we work with. In particular, we talked about our Working Lands for Wildlife initiative and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. Next, on February 4th, Ben Lange, our Working Lands partner biologist with Ducks Unlimited, talked about American black duck ecology and conservation. Following that, we had Katie DiPaolo from New Jersey Audubon talk to us about northern bobwhite quail ecology and conservation. Last week, February 18th, we heard from Mark Virgilio. Mark is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service New Jersey State Coordinator for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. Mark talked about bog turtle ecology and all of the work that we do to conserve their habitat. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Sharon Petzinger, and Sharon will be discussing Golden-winged Warbler ecology. Next week, we'll have the final session of our series, and Olivia Matisse, who is our Mid-Atlantic pollinator specialist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, will join us to discuss pollinator ecology. We would like to remind you to register for each of the events in this series. We have provided a link to the Eventbrite website in the chat to sign up for upcoming Wednesdays. And we'll put that link in the chat shortly. Make sure to click on each date to register individually for the topics that are of interest to you. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. Sharon Petzinger is a principal biologist. That's right, she's had a promotion since we first printed the flyer, and she is now a principal biologist with the New Jersey Department of Fish and Wildlife's Endangered and Non-Game Species Program. She received her bachelor's degree in natural resource management from Cook College, part of Rutgers University, and her master's degree in conservation biology from Georgia Southern University. Sharon has been studying songbirds in New Jersey for almost 25 years, and for the last 15 years, she has been researching and managing habitats through ecological forest management for the conservation of rare songbirds in New Jersey. This evening, she'll be presenting on the ecology and conservation of golden-winged warblers, the most endangered songbird species that breeds in New Jersey, and what is needed to create and maintain nesting habitat for them, and the many other songbirds that need similar habitat. So please welcome Sharon Petzinger. Thanks, Sharon.
Great, thank you, Betsy. So, yeah, my name's Sharon Petzinger. Just a little bit about me. This is what I look like, the person, not the bird. I have been, as Betsy said, I've been studying songbirds in New Jersey for almost 25 years, but that also includes the golden-winged warbler. I started studying them in July 2001, and have been studying them every year since then. And by studying, I mean capturing them, putting little colored bracelets on them, finding and monitoring their nests, monitoring the population in New Jersey, and also analyzing their habitat needs. So it's been a long road with them. A little bit about who I work for. So I work for New Jersey Fish and Wildlife, which is part of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And some of our missions for the DEP would be to manage and promote thriving natural resources. New Jersey Fish and Wildlife would be to maintain our fish and wildlife species at stable, healthy levels and to protect their habitats. And then the bureau within Fish and Wildlife that I work for, the Endangered Non-Game Species Program, focuses more on the endangered, threatened, and non-game wildlife. And so maintaining and enhancing the wildlife populations as well as the ecosystems in which they need. New Jersey Fish and Wildlife is also tasked with managing over 360,000 acres called the wildlife management areas in New Jersey. And basically we maintain and manage habitats for wildlife as well as public access for wildlife related recreation. If you're not familiar with our wildlife supporter program, it's a way to donate money to do this on wildlife management areas for the habitat for the public access. And the link there, or you can just kind of do a search for Wildlife Habitat Supporter NJ to bring you to the website where you can learn more about it. There's a different window decal for the car, for your vehicle every year. And this year is the saltmarsh sparrow, which is an amazing bird. It's abundant, relatively abundant in the salt marshes of New Jersey, and it is the stronghold for their population in the United States. Before I get into my talk, I want to make sure you guys know what I'm talking about. So I like to give some definitions because I'll just say words and forget that not everybody knows the words that I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about something going extinct, that means it's gone forever. And so we have a few species that have gone extinct in New Jersey, passenger pigeon being one of the more popularly known ones. Heath hen was another bird that was once common in New Jersey and is gone forever. When I talk about extirpated, that means it's gone from the state or from the country, but it's still around in other places. And so if I talk about a species being extirpated in New Jersey, that means it's no longer found in New Jersey, but it may be found in New York or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. We have some species statuses that for our New Jersey wildlife. Endangered would be a species that is almost extirpated or extinct, and the golden-winged warbler is one of those species. Threatened means it is almost endangered, and so the barred owl is a threatened species in New Jersey. So they're not doing well. They have low populations, but they're not to the point where they're almost gone. A special concern is a species that's in trouble, but not quite yet threatened. And a cerulean warbler is an example of a special concern species in New Jersey. And then we have species of greatest conservation need. And those are wildlife species identified in our New Jersey Wildlife Action Plan. So they include endangered, threatened, special concern species, but also declining species, regional concern species, and there's a whole vetting process and criteria to become a species of greatest conservation need. And the eastern towhee would be one of those non-state listed, what we call SGCN species. When I talk about habitat loss, I'm talking about a permanent change from a forest. I'll be talking about forests a lot, but from some kind of habitat into something else. So typically when we're talking about forests, forest habitat loss would be a permanent change from the forest to a housing development, or also a lawn, a golf course, or a farm agricultural. Habitat fragmentation is where that permanent change makes that forest smaller and more separate from other forests, and that can cause what I would call a degradation of that forest. Forest disturbance, or I might just say disturbance, would be a temporary change in a forest. And typically the forest structure, that's from the loss of trees. And so this can be caused by fire, by wind and storms and hurricanes, flooding, whether it be heavy rain events or beavers, and silviculture or active management from humans. When I talk about invasive species, I'm typically talking about plants, but they can be plants or animals that are from a different country that really can thrive and take over an area, and the plants specifically can help degrade a forest. And when I talk about overabundant deer, that means that there are too many deer for that forest ecosystem, in which case it prevents a new forest from growing. The deer pretty much overbrowse that forest and can cause forest degradation as well. And so those are the definitions. So that was your Ecology 101 in 2 minutes. Before I get into golden-winged warblers some more, I just want to talk about this biodiversity crisis that we're having. It's worldwide, but I'm going to specifically focus on North America and then New Jersey, where since 1970, almost 3 billion birds have disappeared, as in gone, as in declining populations. 2.5 billion of those birds are birds that migrate, like the Baltimore Oriole. And this is just North America in the last 50 years. The main cause is habitat loss and degradation. So development, conversion of forests to other things or habitat to other things, and the degradation. In this case would be the Japanese barberry in the forest. That's not the only cause of decline, that's the main one, but other threats include direct mortality, which would be from cats, windows, vehicles, and collisions with buildings and towers, and also pesticides. A lot of our aerial insectivores, like barn swallows and chimney swifts, may be suffering declines because of pesticides, reducing the amount of insects that they have to feed on. But I don't want this all to be doom and gloom. There are things that anyone can do to help, and there are things that we have done that have helped. Right? So when people retain or retain their dead trees and increase their snags or their cavity trees, when it's safe to do so, it has really helped the woodpeckers. And so we've seen an increase in woodpeckers since 1970. Banning DDT in the 1970s has really, really helped our hawks and eagles. They have been increasing since 1970 thanks to the conservation efforts. Other things you can do, the biggest killer of birds is cats. So if you're a cat person like I am, do what you can to keep your cats indoors. If they complain a lot, like mine does, not being outside, then think of ways to have a little cat, fenced in, screened in cat gardens that can be outside, but not catch the birds. If you have a yard and you can garden or landscape, use native plants and not the invasive ones. Avoid pesticides when possible. And just make sure when you are using an herbicide or a pesticide, you use the minimum amount necessary for what's needed to be done. Make your windows safer. There's a lot of birds that collide with windows. I've had numerous ones hitting my windows. I would put some reflective decals on the outside of them and they'd still kind of hit. So we just screened it all in. They see the reflection of the windows. They think they can fly through it. And unfortunately, I've lost some birds that way. If you know your birds, you can definitely help do surveys, report your sightings to eBird, to New Jersey Wildlife Tracker, reduce your plastic use, especially along the coast for the shorebirds. And if you're a coffee drinker, most people don't know shade-grown coffee is really good for the birds. And that's because most of the birds winter in Central and South America, and especially in Colombia, where a lot of the coffee is grown. And the full sun coffee plantations is not good habitat for birds, but birds will use shade-grown coffee plantations. So it costs more money, but it is really a big help to the birds. So birds in general are indicators, right? A lot of them are tied to specific habitat types. So if you gave me a list of all the birds that you find on your property, I can tell you what kind of habitat that you have there because they can be so specific. And so when we're looking at the declining birds, we can tell like what habitats are in trouble, whether it be the marshes, the grasslands, the shrublands, or the forests. we have habitats in trouble kind of across the board. And so the golden-winged warbler is one of those forest birds. It's also a neotropical migrant passerine. So it breeds in the northern part of the United States and in the Appalachian Mountains, including northwestern New Jersey. And it winters in Central America and northern South America, including Colombia, and in some cases, shade-grown coffee plantations. They are state endangered. They are a species of conservation concern according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've been petitioned for federal listing and are currently undergoing the status review. The habitat that they need, so they are a forest bird, but they need large patches, at least 5 acres of open canopy and young forest within a really large forest patch. By large forest patch, I'm talking about maybe 70% forest cover within a 1.5 mile radius of this 5 acre or 10 acre open canopy young forest patch. Those patches of open canopy and young forest need to have shrubs and saplings. That's where they find their caterpillars to eat, and grasses and sedges, because that's where they nest. In the top right corner is, I don't know if you can see there is a female golden-winged warbler sitting on a nest right in there. So they just tuck it in the ground and right in the grasses. So when I talk about young and open canopy forest, here's another definition. All right, I lied that I was done. An open canopy forest is typically a forest with canopy about 40 to 60% of the mature trees, 40 to 60% canopy cover. And so it's a mix of mature trees and young trees or saplings. And usually, because there's a lot of sunlight in this open canopy forest, you have shrubs growing and some grasses, unless it's burned frequently to be a savanna, and then it's mature trees and grasses. But for the most part, open canopy would be shrubs, grasses, mature trees, and saplings. The young forest has a less forest canopy, less than 40%, and that has a lot more sunlight reaching the forest floor. So we have a lot more saplings growing and a lot more shrubs and grasses. And so the photo on the right shows kind of that variable vegetation that you get with the grasses, the sedges. You have viburnums in there, blackberries, as well as some hickory trees and saplings and mature oak trees in there. So golden-winged warblers in New Jersey breed in the northwest part of the state. I typically like, just for reference, north of Route 80 and west of Route 287. Warren, Morris, Western Passaic, and all of Sussex counties. They have been declining very rapidly in New Jersey and elsewhere. And for the last 13, 14 years, I've been trying to monitor the population in repeated annual point surveys, and just a steep continuing decline. In 2020, we had 14 breeding pairs that we detected, and running through a population model, there was an 80% chance of extirpation in 10 years if nothing changes. And so we're now 5 years later, we are on that trajectory of being extirpated in 10 years. And so one of the professors at Rowan University calls golden-winged warbler the spotted owl of the young forest. You know, spotted owl, you had to save the forest to save the birds. Here we need to manage the forest to save the birds. So the main reason for their decline in New Jersey is loss of breeding habitat. Right, so they're forest birds, so forest loss and forest fragmentation is a big one. The buildings, the farms, but that's not the only thing. We have reduced disturbance being from the fire, the flooding, the beavers. We also have reduced forest management and natural succession. Natural succession is when you have that kind of shrubby, grassy habitat, but when you do nothing, there's no fire, there's no management, within 15, 20 years, it starts to become a forest. And that habitat is lost just by doing nothing. We also have reduced native tree and shrub regeneration, or the loss of that in the understory, because of invasive plants and deer. So that's another issue. And then golden wings are rather unique, in which they have a relative called the blue-winged warbler that also breeds in New Jersey, and those two species hybridize. And so that doesn't help. Well, it's not the main cause of decline because blue-winged warblers are also declining. They're a species of special concern in New Jersey. It does not help the golden-winged warbler at all when a male golden wing will mate with a female blue wing, and they have hybrid chicks, and you start to lose that genetic pureness in the species. And so these are just a sample of the declining forest birds. Most of these are special concern, SGCN, endangered. And so when I look at this, having studied birds for over 25 years, most of these birds need that open canopy forest, or those young forests, or those large forest gaps with thick understory vegetation. And the golden-winged warbler, this guy right here, is the pickiest of all the birds. That's probably why it's the most endangered as well. And so when you create habitat for golden wings, you're creating habitat for all of these other birds. And so that's what we call an umbrella species. So the golden-winged warbler is an umbrella species for all these other birds and wildlife that would use the same kind of habitat. And so protecting forests is very important. These are all forest birds. They all need the forests. But we've been doing that for decades, and these birds are still declining. So while it's important to keep our forests as forests, it's not going to be enough to stop these declines. So diverse forest structure is incredibly important. This is a wood thrush. It's a common bird, right? Still really common, special concern in New Jersey. And it's a lot of times in the spring and summer, you'll hear their flute-like songs. It's a beautiful song. So they nest in the forest as long as there's some understory vegetation. They nest about 8 to 10 feet in the saplings or shrubs. But when their chicks leave their nest, they go to the young forest and the shrubby areas. And that's where they find the most cover and the most food. And the farther that they go to find this kind of habitat, the less likely they are to survive because they don't fly well, they don't really know how to find food well, and so it's easy pickings for a lot of predators. The golden-winged warbler does the opposite. They nest in this kind of habitat. They nest on the ground and they feed off the shrubs. But when the chicks leave the nest, they go to more of a close canopy forest, but not so close that there's no shrubs. They need that thick shrub layer, about 60% forest canopy and a lot of shrubs. And that's where their chicks go to find food and cover. And so the birds have evolved with this mosaic of different forest structures within a large forest patch. And that is what's missing in a lot of New Jersey. So you can say, well, wasn't that what it was? Wasn't New Jersey one big forest patch of big old growth forest before European settlers came and cut the trees and built their houses and made their farms? No, it wasn't. So New Jersey was definitely mostly forest covered with wetlands and stuff, but a lot of it was young forest. At least 10 to 50% of the forest just in northern New Jersey was open canopy and young forest. So about less than 50 or 60% canopy cover just from hurricanes. Hurricanes with the winds like an F2 tornado would come around every 85 to 150 years and topple down 3/4 of the trees. Now these trees were bigger and more spaced out, so easier to topple down, and there'd be larger canopy gaps when those trees topple down. But this doesn't account for fires and beaver flooding, it was probably more than 10 to 50% open young forest back then. Then we had 25 to 40% what we call a multi-age semi-open oak forest. So that's where you have like about 60 to 70% canopy cover, small canopy gaps, and a lot of shrubs and oak saplings starting to come up. And less than 7% were old growth forests, likely hemlock and northern hardwoods, because we do still have a lot of hemlock forests. Unfortunately, we have the hemlock woolly adelgid, which is not helping with the hemlock much at all. Today, our forests are out of balance in terms of age and structure. And this is because there was a lot of forestry and logging and cutting and farming going on for the last couple of centuries. And then everything kind of started growing back up the same time when folks abandoned their farms and went to the cities. That was about the 1930s. And so most of our forests are of similar age and have not really been managed since. Fire's been suppressed. Hasn't been a lot of silviculture, and it's gotten to the point where our oak forests are in danger of being lost because they're adapted to fire and they need some sunlight in order to regenerate. And without that fire, we have the shade tolerant plants like the maples and the beeches and birches growing in the understory. And windstorms, so the forests are too dense for the large scale blowdowns now. They're middle aged, so they're not super huge, and they kind of buffer the wind against each other. And so when you do have a tree fall down, it's not really a large gap that it causes. And so between that, suppressed fires and controlling beavers, we really don't have a lot of these forests left. So we have over 80% of our forests are closed canopy mature instead of 3 to 58%. We don't have a lot of old growth forest either. A lot of that is because of past logging as well as the woolly and delgid. And then we have less than 8% of the open canopy young and less than 11% of the multi-aged oak forest. And that's as of 2015. Oaks are a very special species. I could probably do a whole nother presentation about that. So Lepidoptera are moths and butterflies, and the basic food source for golden-winged warblers and a lot of other birds, especially when they're raising chicks. That is pretty much the sole source of food, the caterpillars for feeding chicks. And oaks, oak trees, red oak, black oak, white oak, they support the majority of moth and butterfly species or caterpillars. They're a major food source. And when you look at what tree species or vegetation that golden wings prefer to forage on, white oak is number one. And they support 30 moth and butterfly species. Willows is another group of species that support a lot of these moth and butterfly species that golden-winged warblers also like to forage in, as pincherry, aspen, gray birch, and speckled alder. So some of these are upland species, willows and alder or wetland species. All of these tree species or shrub species need sunlight. They're what we call shade intolerant or intermediate tolerant, which means they need, intermediate tolerant would be, they can start growing in some shade, but they need at least 50% canopy cover to actually become a tree. Where shade intolerant means they need almost full sunlight in order to germinate and kind of grow. So what you can do, if you have a forest, please keep your forest as a forest. That is by far the most important thing, is to keep forest as forest. Very slightly next to that, like I almost want to say still really important, would be to address the loss of forest diversity. Increase that native vegetation structure and that diversity, whether it be opening the forest canopy, controlling invasive species, or controlling the deer. So if you live in Northwest Jersey, the area in green is the Working Lands for Wildlife program for golden-winged warbler habitat. The purple outlines are the focal areas. These are the areas where we have the high forest cover and are more likely to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of managing for golden-winged warblers. The little orange dots you see in the green, those are properties already enrolled in this program. And so you can see it's kind of spread out mostly in these purple areas. And it's been great. This program's been going on since I think 2012 it launched. So in the last 13 or so years, we've been able to grow to almost, I think, over 50 sites at this point. Enhancing habitat diversity and growing oak trees. So if you have a forest, or even if you don't have a forest, just knowing this and supporting this will be huge. And so for those of you who don't know, this is Sparta Mountain Wildlife Management Area. It's in Sussex County. It's one of the wildlife management areas that I help to manage and do that ecological forestry for the habitat. And so on the left, you have a typical forest. So in Sparta, 90% of the upland forests look like the photo on the left. You have the big oak trees, which is the one marked in orange. And then you have, these are birches and maples back here, the northern hardwoods that are coming in through the understory. So if 90% of your forest, or 80%, looks like this, and the wildlife need forest that looks more like this, and this is less than 4% of the upland forest on Sparta Mountain. And you know that the bird species here before treatment, and this site, I was only found 4 bird species breeding here, or during the breeding season. 2 of them were SGC on the species of greatest conservation need. On this site, this is 3 years after the treatment, 32 bird species, 15 SGCN, because we opened the canopy and we got that native regeneration in shrubs and saplings in. So most of your forest looks like this. You want it to look like this. You have to do something that some people really, really, really don't like, and that's cut trees. And that's probably the hardest thing to stomach about doing this, is it looks horrible. It looks like a hurricane came through or a bomb went off, and that's the point. It's a disturbance. We're creating that disturbance that doesn't happen anymore. And we're leaving the big oak trees, the ones marked in orange, and we're cutting all of the rest. And this is a seed tree cut, so we're getting it down to about 30% canopy to get that young forest. And this is all the same site, before, during, and after, 3 years after. And it works. I've had the privilege of monitoring the sites that were managed on private and public land since 2014. And this is the total number of bird species is the red and the blue combined. So we're averaging about 12 before the management. And then just look how it jumps. 3 months after, we do the management in the winter, let's say we're finished in March, by May or June, before the grasses and the shrubs even start coming in, we have a jump in bird species, and it keeps growing the next few years and then starts to plateau again. And so the red is the SGCN, the blue is all other bird species. It's just an amazing thing to see. And we're actually almost to 70 properties now between public and private lands. So it's really, this is what keeps me going, is seeing the response year after year after year. And this is because of the vegetation. They're responding to the open canopy, and then they're responding to the herbaceous vegetation, which is here in yellow, and the shrubby areas, which is here in orange. And so you can see how the birds just increase over time and then taper off. This is on private lands. Public lands, it's a bit of a different response. This is because how well your forest and the wildlife respond to opening the forest canopy depends on the soil type, the hydrology, but most importantly, the abundance of deer and the amount of invasive plants that are on the site before you do the treatment. And so you're more likely to achieve greater bird results in areas where you don't have a lot of deer and you don't have a lot of invasive plants. And those tend to be on those public lands like Sparta Mountain, where you have, where it's open for hunting and there's less of that agriculture and disturbance and residential areas that kind of help bring in those invasive plants. So if you do have them, if you do have a lot of deer, if you do have invasive plants, you can still do this kind of management, but you need to be able to control the invasives before and after and figure out a way to reduce your deer density, either through hunting or through fencing or some other means. And then you can get the good results. You'll still get good results either way because birds are responding to that open canopy structure, but it's even better if you can get that shrub layer to come in as well, and that it's native. So regardless, whether you have a forest or not, if you have a yard, if you can plant anything in a pot and put it on your porch, these are some great native shrubs and native trees that really we don't see a lot anymore in our forests, mainly because they need some sunlight. Um, so if you have a yard with sunlight and want to do something for birds and wildlife, these are great native shrubs and trees to plant. Um, they provide that cover for shrub nesting birds. They provide the berries for foraging, especially during migration, and they produce flowers for pollinators. And that is all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Sharon. That was excellent. Especially this last slide is a great resource to have. Again, I'd like to invite anyone that would like to ask a question. Please feel free to unmute your microphone, or you can also type your question in the chat.
Is there work in South Jersey like this? A little bit. A couple weeks ago, there was a presentation on northern bobwhite, and so it is similar to this in the sense that they're doing some management, but it's more of creating a savanna forest mosaic than the young forest mosaic. But we definitely need to do more, I believe, in South Jersey as well for bobwhite and a lot of other species.
I would agree,
Okay.
Sharon. We do a lot of forestry work in the Pine Barrens for that Pine Barren savanna type habitat. But there are definitely a lot of private landowners that are implementing forestry management practices, maybe not necessarily for a particular songbird, but in general for forest health, to diversify the age class of the forest and the species composition within the forest. So NRCS and our partner agencies and organizations, we do work with a lot of private landowners to do forestry work.
It is a great resource, and the private lands that I've been monitoring up in North Jersey, they're all part of the working lands for wildlife, so have that contract and cost sharing with NRCS.
Yeah, and a lot of the initial work is to do some of the mechanical and manual removal of woody vegetation, but then a lot of our landowners, especially in Central and South Jersey, are managing land that has had some of that forestry work done, but continuing managing like with prescribed burning and other activities like that. So you do have another question in the chat, Sharon. The question is, I really love the list of the shrubs and trees you provided. My question is, these would be good to plant in backyards if you're creating native habitat.
Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely, and it's what I try to look for when I'm trying to replace the ash trees that have died or want to get rid of some of my winged euonymus shrubs and find a replacement. This is the list I go to. So as long as you have the right kind of soil and know how to take care of it, these are great ones to add to your yard.
And that's really the benefit of a lot of the native species, Sharon, is that they are adapted to our soils. So they don't necessarily need additional inputs of fertilizers or extended amount of watering once they are established. They're adapted to our conditions here in New Jersey.
Yeah, you just want to be careful because I planted a red osier dogwood
Okay.
in my yard, and my yard is rocky and clayey, and we had a drought and it was dead because it's more of a
Yep.
wetland species. So you just want to be mindful of that and just know if you're going to do more of a wetland species like a willow or a dogwood, except for the flowering dogwoods, that you want to water it a lot when we have a drought.
Yeah. Right species, right spot. Okay, so you have another question. Do you look for yellow-winged warblers specifically in areas with beaver presence?
Yes. I look I look everywhere where there's shrubby and young forest habitat. The shrubby wetlands, beaver wetlands. Some beaver wetlands are too inundated to support that vegetation, but when it's abandoned or when they move their dam and some of the areas are allowed to regrow, it becomes perfect habitat for them. They really do like that kind of herbaceous beaver wetland habitat next to like a wetland forest, shrub forest. That kind of dynamic seems to be their favorite, which is hard to find.
Sharon, you have a question from Kathy, and she says, excellent program, Sharon. Thank you. My understanding is that there's no way to prevent golden wings from interbreeding with blue wings, but that this program will benefit so many other species. Again, great.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Kathy. So yeah, there are some habitat differences between blue wings and golden wings. Golden wings being a little bit more picky, they have to have that forest cover surrounding them. Um, and golden wings tend to prefer wetland areas, whereas blue wings don't need that forest cover. You'll find them right next to a farm field or residential area, and they tend to prefer the uplands instead of the wetlands. But they're still like they're overlapped. There's no way to otherwise keep them apart. And um, yeah, but then blue wings are also declining. So while it's not great for the golden wings, we need to help the blue wings as well, and all the other species.
Thanks, Sharon. And Jake put a comment in the chat with a resource, and it says, here is the bobwhite quail video, an umbrella species in South Jersey that, and Sharon mentioned that. So the link is included in the comment from Jake. Thanks, Jake. Sharon, maybe we'll just give it another minute or so to see if there are any additional questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, you have one coming right now.